Hey guys, welcome back to We Met at Acme. I am so excited to be here with writer, mental health advocate, and co-host of the Just Between Us podcast, Allison Raskin. Hi,
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
thanks for being here. So we always start with, what is your favorite romantic gesture?
Ooh, I love a surprise. So I think that anything that's going on behind my back, which involves planning, and then I don't even have to think about it, and then I get surprised with it, is my favorite by far.
I love a surprise too, but I never get a surprise. The only surprise I've ever gotten was my engagement because I'm such a planner. Like I've
Mm.
never, ever, ever experienced it. Can you give me some tips as someone who has, it seems like, gotten surprises?
I really can only say you got to have a partner who really plans too. Like I think,
Right.
like I knew I was going to get engaged and I knew like what weekend it was going to happen. So I was like, "Oh, like there's no way I'm going to be surprised by this. Like it'll be nice, but like how am I even going to reply? Like I'll just be like, "Oh," like because we were going away to Santa Barbara and we had already started planning the wedding and all these things. So I was like, it'll be lovely, but it won't be a surprise. But then the night before we went to go have dinner with his friends for his birthday, and he had rented out a room, and my friends were there, and I was like shocked. So it was like,
Oh,
it wasn't like that I didn't know I was getting engaged, it was I didn't know the timing. So sometimes, like, even if you know what's happening, just being thrown by the day can really be fun.
yeah, I'm with you. Like I feel like surprises are underrated and there's two people in the world. There's people who love them and there's people
Hmm.
who hate them. And they're just different people.
I think I love them because I'm such an anxious person. So
Mm.
like it's so exciting for me not to have to do any planning, not to have to like be hyper vigilant about like if things will go well or like have any anticipatory anxiety, and just to like get to arrive in the moment not having done any work and still get to have fun is like very exciting for me.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. So backing up a little bit, how old are you, Allison, and where are you from?
I'm 34. I'm from Westchester, New York, but I've lived in LA since I was 18.
Love it. Oh my God, I literally could have thought that you were 21 if you
Oh
asked
my
me.
God.
Like you have
Thank you
such
so
young
much.
energy. Have you ever gotten that?
I used to get it all the time, and then I hit 30 and people were like, "You look your age."
Oh my God, I would kill someone. I mean, I'm 32 and I feel like, I don't know, it's so weird. Tell me if you have experienced this in your 30s. I feel like every time, because my birthday's coming up in September and I'm turning 33, and but I felt like I don't know if I'm 33 or 30. I felt like I was 33. I
Yeah.
feel like in your 30s, like they all blend together almost.
Oh yeah. Before I turned 34, it was like a month or two before I was recording a TikTok and I was like, "And I'm 34." And then in the caption I had to be like, "I'm not 34. I don't even know how old I
Yeah.
am."
Yeah, it's crazy. It's wild. You've been very open about your anxiety and mental health struggles, um, especially when it comes to like relationship stuff. Yet you just mentioned that you're engaged. How did you kind of become like, you know, calm? I don't know if calm is the right word, but kind of deal with everything that you felt anxiety wise when it came to relationships and end up in a healthy partnership, because I think so many of our listeners experience anxiety, mental health issues so much, especially around relationships, because
Mhm.
this is a dating podcast, and they feel like it's in the way of them finding their person. So how did you kind of overcome that?
It's been a long journey. And at this point in my career, what I really love to focus on is that intersection of romantic relationships and mental health and how the two play off each other. Because I think you're exactly right that, like, for a lot of us, romantic relationships can exacerbate our mental health in a way that other parts of our lives don't. And that was definitely the case for me. Like, growing up, I would lose control of myself when it came to boyfriends or people I was interested in or situationships. Like I was like the worst version of myself, And for a really long time, I thought that, like, oh, I'm just like bad at dating. I'm just like the quote unquote crazy girl. And then, like, in parallel to that, I've had OCD since I was 4 years old. I struggled on and off with depression. I have generalized anxiety. But, like, it took me forever to, like, put those two things together and be like, oh, maybe this is why I'm struggling so much. And I think that everyone's journey is so different. But coming from a more anxious attachment and anxious place, for me, a lot of the healing came from it. A lot of the healing came from me creating a better relationship with myself. So for a really long time, I thought that I like wasn't lovable. I thought that no one would love me enough. I thought that I was disposable. And so if you're living in that place of fear, or that's the way that you see the world, like one of my favorite terms is like what your schema is, which is sort of like the lens through which you see the world. So like my relationship schema was always like I'm I'm unlovable. So then every person's actions was seen through that schema. So I was constantly trying to like prove this point of view to myself by being like, oh, he didn't text me back. That means I'm never going to hear from him again, which would then lead to like me having an anxiety attack and texting 10 times. And once I started to sort of change the way I viewed myself and create more self confidence and self worth and just learn to like myself, other people's opinion of me, both in my regular life and in my dating life, started to shift because it didn't affect me as much. Like one of the ways I could tell that I was getting better was in the past when I would like someone and they weren't interested in me, it would be like, okay, how do I convince them that they should be interested in me? Whereas like once I started to build up my relationship with myself, if someone wasn't interested in me, I was like, that's weird. Like I was like, oh, that's a turn off that you don't
Right,
think that
like
I'm
their loss.
awesome. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly. And that was such a huge shift, and sort of like noticing that shift in myself was really what inspired me to write my book Overthinking About You, which really explores that intersection of dating when you have anxiety, OCD, and depression. And doing the research for that book and interviews, I think people, depending on how their symptoms manifest for them, it's a different path. But for me, so much of it was just like changing how I talk to myself. Learning how to self-soothe was crucial.
Mm,
Learning how to emotionally regulate. I mean, I didn't know how to emotionally regulate until I was in my late 20s. I didn't even really understand what that term meant. But being able to get to a place where I could feel a negative emotion and it wouldn't derail my day or derail how I thought about myself was such a game changer.
yeah, yeah, that's huge. And so let's say like you are somebody who has, anxiety about relationships and relationship OCD, which maybe you can
Mhm.
define for us because I know that it is defined in many different ways on social media when in fact I'm sure there's just one way. But yeah, let's start by defining that and then I'll ask you.
Yeah, so OCD is a beast of a disorder in that it manifests in so many different ways. And like saying you have OCD, it's almost like I'm alive. Like, what does that mean for you? Like, everyone's is so different. And so relationship OCD is a subset of OCD, and it's basically when you continue where you feel like you are constantly either doubting the relationship that you're in, or like doubting your choice of partner. So like it can be partner focused where it's like I don't know if like I don't know if I can listen to this person's laugh for the next 30 years. And then you're just obsessing over whether or not you can listen to this person's laugh, and it becomes really draining because it's hard to be in the moment with your partner and like appreciate them and enjoy them when you just like have this intrusive thought going of like, yeah, but what if in 10 years I hate them, or what if they're not good looking enough, or what if like the love I feel for them isn't right and it's not real love. And then there can also sort of be more like relationship focused where it's like, what if they don't love me enough? What if I'm not good enough for them? And it's basically like whenever you have a thought that you can't calm and that is based maybe more in fear than in the present situation. So what's really difficult about relationship OCD is that sometimes there are reasons to be worried in your relationship, right? Like, not every relationship is perfect. There are valid concerns to have. And so it's really difficult for people with relationship OCD to distinguish between what is a valid concern and what is relationship anxiety. And so some of the tools I offer people to sort of like make that distinction is, are you focusing on an actual problem? Like, if you're worried that like your partner never spends any time with you because they prioritize their friends, that's a real action that they're doing and something that like they could change, or when you ask them to change it they say no thanks, and then maybe that's an incompatibility. But if it's something more that is like future, super future focused, or focused on something that can't be defined. So a lot of times there is like this latching on to like, but am I really in love? Do I love them enough? And what does enough mean? You know, like
Right.
OCD loves certainty, loves to categorize and rank things and be like, well, I've hit this bar, so now I know it's okay. But something about love is everyone experiences love differently. There is no way to really measure love. So then you find yourself comparing to other people and other people's relationships and being like, well, the way my friend talks about their partner, it seems like she must love him in a way that I don't love my partner. And so maybe I'm doing this wrong. And so you can see how it just like feeds itself. But if you can sort of take a step back and say, am I trying to answer a question that can't be answered? Or am I focusing on something that doesn't even bother me right now, but I'm just afraid will eventually bother me? Then we're maybe heading into relationship anxiety territory, relationship OCD.
Yeah, I feel like also, and I've had this conversation on the podcast before, like there are kind of two kinds of people when it comes to getting married and, settling down with someone. And there are some people who are like totally sure. And then
Mm.
there are some people who have doubts. And I wonder, like, what's the difference between doubts and relationship OCD? Because, like, I know somebody who called off their wedding because they were, having doubts. They were like having hives when they tried the dress on and, like, all of the things. And they called off their wedding and now they're back together.
Mm.
And I don't know what to take, like, I don't know how to take it. But part of me is like, I'm nervous because if I had such strong feelings, like, I would feel like I should listen to them. But maybe that's just because I'm someone who doesn't have doubts often, have relationship OCD. So what do you think?
I think it's very normal to have doubts in a relationship. I actually think if somebody has no doubts at no point in their relationship trajectory, that's a little strange to me. I think that partnering up with another person who has a completely different background than you, who has a different family than you, who probably has different ways of moving through the world than you is always a risk. There's always some level of incompatibility in our partnerships. There's always some stuff that needs to be worked out. There's probably some feelings towards attachment on both sides. And so I think doubts are very normal. It's just, what are the doubts based in? Right. And so, like, again, if it gets back to just like, I just have this quote unquote feeling, and then you also know that you're an anxious person, or maybe you also know you have OCD. Like, if it's just this like feeling, like, I don't know, like, what do you feel when you're with them? Right. Like, that's another big thing. Like, when you're with them, are you happy and present and do you like who you are? But then when you go home, like, you just feel doubts creeping in, even though you can't name them. That might be more just like something is triggered in you about intimacy, about being vulnerable. You might have relationship OCD. But if the doubts are like, I think this person's going to be a bad parent and I want to have kids, that's a valid doubt, like,
Right.
again, like, I think if you can name the doubt and the doubt is a real problem that you can take to your partner and say, I am worried about blank, and it's something that they can actually choose to address or not address, then that's something you really need to pay attention to, right? Like, if it's like, I'm really worried that you're going to make us move for your job and I don't want to move. Like, those are the kinds of things you should name and say and talk to your partner about before you get married. But if it's like, I'm really worried that in 15 years I won't love you anymore. And it's like, okay, but why? And it's like, I'm just worried about that. okay, but do you love me now? Yeah. And it's like, do you want to see me tomorrow and be my partner tomorrow? Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, okay, so maybe that's more just those fears, that anxiety, that OCD. So if there's something you can like actually address with your partner, that's a valid, important doubt, and that you should discuss. And then if it's more like unnameable, then I think we're maybe getting into more of like just the mental health of it all.
So interesting because I feel like men have men like act on their doubts more than women do. Um, I had a friend just go through something where in the beginning of dating her partner, he said something like, I'm worried that like I'm not, it was like something like I'm worried about breaking your heart, or like I'm worried that I'm not going to give you what you want or something, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
they like proceeded to date, and then he did exactly that. So I'm like, is that a doubt, or is that like a I warned you, you know?
I think it's so hard to categorize all this stuff into like neat boxes, even though we really want to. I was actually engaged before in 2020, and my partner, my ex fiance, walked out on me and like clearly had been keeping a lot of doubts and never even really expressed those doubts to me. Instead, just was like, something is missing and bounced. And so I spent a lot of time being like, what was missing? What were these doubts about? Like, what could I have, could I have done something differently? And then I realized like I can't do something differently if I'm not given the information, right? Like if he
Right.
had come to me and been like, I'm really concerned about your OCD and what it's going to be like for you to parent with that, then I would be like, okay, let's talk that through. Like, let's see if this is something that like you don't trust me with, like, but I was given nothing. I wasn't given really much to work with. And so that's why I think that like having these direct conversations with our partners, even when they're really uncomfortable, is sort of the greatest service you can do both for yourself and the relationship. Because either it's going to come out that like, yeah, your doubt's right, like they do intend to continue to party until 2 a.m. even once you're married, and that's their lifestyle and they're not going to change it. Or like they could be like, oh, I had no idea that bothered you, let me adapt to a lifestyle that fits better for us as a couple. But if you're not having those conversations, it's impossible to get any resolution. And then the doubts can just like really feed themselves until you like work yourself into a tizzy and suddenly like you're abandoning your fiance on a random Monday night.
Right. Yeah, no, that's, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry that that happened to you, but I'm so
Oh,
glad that
thank
you
you.
met your current partner.
Thank you.
But I think that that's like, that's, I like, it's not that I'm blaming men, but I feel like that's more of a male problem than female, like to hold on to things and not communicate them. Um, that's happened to me in past relationships where like it all came out on the day of the breakup.
Right.
And I was like, wait, if you had just told me you had X, Y, and Z issue, like we would have worked it out, but you didn't give us a chance to because
Mm-hmm.
you were keeping this like resentment list, and like that sucks. So that's really hard. And then another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which comes up a lot, is one partner having like mental health issues or depression and how to deal with that. And I'm so curious because I am that partner in my relationship. Like I have some mental health issues. I have dealt with depression in the past, not in my relationship necessarily, but before I met my partner. And my partner has zero mental health problems. Like it's so crazy. He is just like coasting through life, like happy as a clam, and it makes no sense to me. But I do feel that that's a huge part of why we work. And I wonder, like, if it can work if both people kind of have those same issues.
Oh, definitely. I think that there is so much stigma around having mental health struggles and that it makes you a worse partner. But I actually find that like if you have struggled with your mental health and you've actually like done the work to not fix yourself, right? It's like I'm always going to have OCD, but like getting to a place where you sort of understand how to care for yourself, you have a better grip on like once things get worse or once things take a turn, stepping in earlier to address your issues, to get the support that you need. Like all those tools that you've learned on how to care for yourself are tools that you can then use in a relationship with another person. So a lot of times, like if you've had these struggles, it kind of can sometimes make you an even better partner, right? Because like you have a lot of empathy. You understand that sometimes mental health struggles, or all of the time, aren't super logical. You know, can be less judgmental, really able to not get scared away by something because maybe you've experienced that thing too, or you just like understand how it works a little bit better. I not to say that like someone who doesn't struggle should only be with someone who doesn't, or you know, like I think so many combinations of partnerships can work, but I think that the undercurrent of all successful partnerships is the ability to understand that other people's brains operate differently than your brain.
Hmm.
And that can be a real leap for some people,
Yeah.
right? Like some people can be like, but you have no reason to be anxious. So therefore, I will be annoyed and mad that you're anxious.
Right. Right.
Where if you have a compassionate and empathetic partner, they can say, I don't understand why you're anxious, but I don't need to understand to be able to care for you, or to be able to give you a little extra support, or to just even let you do your own thing until you can come back to your baseline.
Mm. When do you think someone should bring up issues that they have, even if it's like, an invisible illness or just like major anxiety when first dating? Because I feel like friends of mine who have it definitely didn't bring it up until like they were deeper into it. And then they kind of had to backtrack and explain, like, oh, I'm not like just, different. This is who I was, and, things like that.
It's such a great question, and one of the ones I'm asked most frequently because it is such a tricky thing to navigate. And I think the answer is not super clear cut in terms of time. I think it's more about the depth of the relationship that you're building. So I always say that, you know, there are going to be people that go out 10 different times and never talk about anything of substance, where like it's like, yeah, I've been seeing them for a couple months, but like I don't know what their parents do, and I don't even really know where they went to college, and like we just sort of like have fun and hook up and talk about work. And so in that situation, like if they're not really sharing their full self with you, and they're, you know, like the serious things that they've gone through, like you are under no obligation to really share that either. But then there are people who maybe they're a little bit older. Maybe they go on a date, they're both 35. That first date lasts 4 hours. And during that time, they end up talking about all sorts of things, including serious things. And in that situation, I think disclosing your mental health history to a degree is appropriate on a first date, right? Because maybe they're sharing something back with you that they've lost a parent or they've been ill or something, and that's how we get to know each other, is like we each share. But I think that something to really pay attention to is how the person receives what you're sharing. And so when I was younger, I would share more from a place of compulsion, where it
Mm.
was like this fear of rejection. And so let me put it all out there all at once, and then you decide if like you can handle that or not, right? Now it's about sharing when I think that they've earned it and when I want to see how they receive it. So when we share these vulnerable parts of ourselves, often we're just so fixated on like if they will reject us. But I actually think it's an opportunity to see if they're worthy of you,
Right.
right? Because if you're like, yeah, I have been diagnosed with something since I was a kid, and they're like, oh, cool, like, do you want another drink? Like,
Right. Then it's
that's
like this
maybe,
person will not be able to handle this.
yeah, they don't have the space for it. They maybe don't have the interest in it. But if the person is really like engaged and curious, I don't think that they have to previously be super familiar with whatever it is that you've gone through. But I think that the curiosity and the empathy need to be there. And I also don't think that you need to share everything all at once. I think leading with what is more relevant to who you are now is helpful. So, you know, there's some, for example, maybe there's someone who's had a suicide attempt. but that suicide attempt was 15 years ago, and they haven't struggled with suicidal ideation in a long time, and they're doing a lot better. Like, how relevant? I mean, obviously, as you get serious and date somebody, you're going to want to share that, but like, that doesn't necessarily need to come out in the first conversation about your mental health. Again, depending on the dynamic, right? And so I think it's really, again, instead of like time spent, it's really like, how is the conversation going, and do they deserve to learn more?
Yeah, I love that phrasing. It's like it also takes back your power when revealing information can be a very vulnerable thing. It's like, okay, let's see if they're able to, meet my standard of how I'd love somebody to react to this. So I like that a lot. In terms of going back to like just having a partner who is going through these issues, what is the best way to support this person other than trying to understand and stuff like that? Just like, what can you do because I think if this were my partner, I'd want to fix it. Like, I want to fix the problem. But at what point do you stop trying to fix it and just let them be sad in that moment,
So a way that I really like to conceptualize it, and I'm stealing this from Dr. Robin Gibbs, who I interviewed in my book and is also my mom's best friend, is just the idea that you are your own primary helper and your partner is your secondary helper. So with the caveat of like people who are in crisis or people who have like really severe chronic mental illness who are unable to help themselves, with that aside, for the most part, your mental health is your responsibility. And so you're the one driving the seat in terms of like what you need to do to care for yourself, what you need to do to feel better. Again, not if you're in crisis, not if you're dealing with certain disorders and psychosis and things like that. But, for something like anxiety or OCD, when it's not at a crisis level, like, it's really turning to the partner that's struggling and saying, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there's this really harmful belief, at least in like Western society, that like your person will inherently know how to be the right partner to you. But like circling back to that idea that like we're completely different people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, because I think every relationship is an intercultural relationship, because unless you're marrying your sibling, you grew up in different families and families have their own culture. And so like not expecting that the right person will instinctively know what to do, but instead looking for someone who, when you tell them, they listen.
Mm.
Right. So if it's like you're like, actually, when I'm anxious, it's just really helpful for me to just like put on my favorite TV show, eat some popcorn, and like zone out, until I can like come back to myself. And if they're like, great, let's watch that show, let me get you the popcorn,
Right.
that's wonderful. That's a great partner. But if you say that and then the partner is like, no, come on, let's go for a run.
Oh
And
God.
it's
Oh
like,
my God.
I don't
In
want to.
any context, that's a horrible partner.
But right, and I mean, sometimes there are situations where what the person who's suffering is doing isn't working, where like their coping skills aren't kicking in, or they're not up for even trying to feel better. And then I think sometimes partners, depending on the seriousness of the relationship, need to maybe step in a little bit more. And I think like a way to like show love is to be able to say like, hey, like, what about going back in therapy? Like, how do you feel about that? And a really great question to ask is, what has helped in the past? Because
Mm.
yes, sometimes like maybe you'll be there for your partner's first depressive episode, but a lot of times people have already dealt with these types of things. And so it's like, what got you out of the last one? How can
Right.
we, like help, like guide me through what we can do together to like get you there? But also like releasing yourself from the responsibility, like you said, that it's on you to fix it, because it's really not. You're just the secondary helper.
Yeah, I really like that. What helped in the past. I feel like let's get you back in therapy one can be definitely trickier, especially if it's a male partner, because I feel like men are like more resistant to therapy, probably less now, but than we are. I feel like the best way to get like a male partner in therapy is to like brag about your own therapist, to be like, oh my God, I feel amazing today. I just had a therapy session. Like, we went over everything. I am at peace with my relationship with your mom, with my, like all the things. I feel like just promoting it, instead of being like, are you going to go back to therapy? I find that works so much better because then they're like intrigued. And they like feel like it's like this secret club that like they're like, oh, how do I get in on that?
Yeah, I try not to overly gender people because I think that there are, all sorts of personalities within, both genders, all non, across the gender spectrum. And but I do think that like knowing what works for your partner is important, right? Because like and also understanding what their relationship to therapy is. So there are going to be people where like they have a really negative connotation with it. They think that that means something is fundamentally wrong with them. And I think that, like you were alluding to, like the way that we talk about therapy is so powerful, right? Because if we can talk about it as this great resource, as this thing that we look forward to, as this thing that's really benefited us, then exactly, like they can start to like kind of get intrigued by it. But I do think that if you are someone who really struggles with their mental health, picking a partner who looks down on therapy or medication is going to be an uphill battle.
Oh
Like
yeah, for
that is
sure.
going to be really tough. And so something I think that can kind of be a good way to sort of like a barometer early on if you have struggles with your mental health is kind of figuring out how they feel about therapy. And I don't think
Mm,
it means they need to have gone, but if they have a real negative bias against it, that's something to really pay attention to and consider.
totally agree. And that for me would be a red flag for sure.
It'd be a
Um,
red flag for dating me, right? Like that's the
mhm.
thing is like I think that we talk about like deal breakers as something that's universal when they're really not. Like something that would bother me might not even like be a blip on your radar. And that's why I think it's so important for people to sit down with themselves and figure out like what are my actual deal breakers? Like what do I know both from my relationship history and from like my personality that I cannot tolerate? And then what are things that I maybe am not seeking in a partner, but I would be okay with? Because those are two
Yeah.
different things. And I think we often lump them into one.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, so that's why on my Instagram for the podcast, I'll do like these poll questions that are like, is this a deal breaker for you or is it just a red flag? We recently did one. I'm actually curious your take on it. Um, it was a girl who was dating a guy for like a year, and she found out that within the first 6 months of their relationship, he went to like a massage parlor and he got two happy endings. And she was asking, is this a red flag or is it a deal breaker? Like, what does everyone else think? Um, and I was shocked to find out that it was like 50-50. I'm curious, like what you would think.
I think it really depends on your views of what monogamy means, right? And so like and your views on sex work and your views on secrecy. And so I think it's one of those things where it's worth a conversation with the guy and being like, why did you think this was okay? And like,
Yeah.
do you see why this would be upsetting to me? And did you purposely keep this from me, or did you just assume it was fine and so you didn't feel like you had to tell me? Like to me that's like the tip of the iceberg to like start a much bigger conversation. And then I think at the end of the conversation, if you get to a place where you can like agree on like what is and is not acceptable in your relationship agreement, then I think you can move past it. But if like they're like, I'm gonna keep getting my happy endings whether you like it or not, that might not work. Or if like you might even get to a place where you're like, actually, like that type of sex work doesn't bother me. And if this is something that like you do for yourself and you have no emotional attachment to it and it's part of a massage, maybe I'm actually more comfortable with this than I initially thought that I was.
Yeah. Wow, you're a much more forgiving person than I am. I'm like, that's a deal breaker and never speak to me again. Allison, this has been so much fun chatting with you. Can you leave our listeners with a quote or a piece of advice, maybe something from your book?
Yeah, I love to leave listeners with just the idea that you don't have to give up on love. That, you know, even if it's hard, even if you've had a lot of heartbreak, even if you've had a fiance walk out on you, if partnership is something that you really want for yourself, then you deserve to keep striving for it, and we can get better at doing this. And you just have to keep trying.
I love it. Where can everybody find you, follow you, and read your book?
Yeah, so my book, Overthinking About You, is available anywhere books are sold. And then you can find me at Allison Raskin on socials. I also have a mental health focused Instagram and Substack called Emotional Support Lady. So you can check that out. And if you want to hear more of me, I have a weekly podcast called Just Between Us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.